Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Autumn Durald Arkapaw, the cinematographer for Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, a great film, and I'm so excited to speak to you, Autumn. I wanted to start your first conversation with Ryan about the film, and particularly how you guys approach the challenges of shooting underwater, because obviously so much of this movie is about the Namor and Telecon and stuff. So I guess where'd you start there? Because it seems like it would be very complicated, from at least from a viewing standpoint.
Yeah, I guess where it started was I was actually in production on Loki, and I got a call from a good friend of mine, Rachel Morrison, who shot the first one, and she had some schedule conflicts. So she wasn't going to be able to do it, and she mentioned Ryan wanted to speak with me. So that's kind of how I got, into the fold, and we had an early talk just to get to know each other because we had previously not worked together and met and hit it off, and it felt very just perfect union of like our whole group. I also spoke with Hannah, the production designer, and yeah, I think starting off it was mostly about they were rewriting the script, unfortunately, for Chadwick's passing, and we got into mostly just themes of grief, mother-daughter relationships. This time around, the strong women protagonists, characters in the film, he really wanted to highlight those. And yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about, just the two cultures, obviously, Wakanda and versus the Mayan culture, which would be introduced, and as you mentioned, underwater. So those were bigger conversations we had down the line, but originally it was very important to him to kind of have this fog or texture of grief that would be a through line in the visuals and would be felt. So we started there, and I think it's always important to kind of listen to your director emotionally and see what he or she wants to bring to the table first and foremost, like what they want their audiences to feel, instead of getting bogged down with like references or too much visual, like exacting references and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So I think we started there, and it was important, I think, because I'm an emotional shooter, and I think for me, because I like to operate and I've done a lot of smaller films, as has Ryan, you know, um, if I'm sitting right behind the camera and I'm not emoting, or if I don't feel that, what we're trying to convey to the audience, your audience won't feel it. So we spoke a lot about what the script meant, as far as those emotional through lines and the loss of Chadwick. And yeah, I think you feel that in Ryan's kind of his voice. It's a very big film. There's a lot of action, big sets, but it feels very intimate and personal. And that's what I think is successful about it, because you don't find that very often when you have these big films.
Definitely not. And everything you said there is really true and interesting from a viewing standpoint. Like I remember watching the movie, I saw this like on opening weekend because I had not gotten, doesn't matter. I had not gotten to see like a press screening or whatever. So I was like, I'm going to go with like, audiences. And the opening of the movie, obviously, when T'Challa dies, and then there's the memorial for T'Challa, and obviously then for Chadwick as well as an audience. I never heard a theater so quiet before, like an
Mm.
entire packed theater, and everybody was just so wrapped and so emotional because of the images and like obviously processing their own grief. And I guess, can you like, I think that was early in the shoot based on other interviews I've done. So can you talk about like how you kind of approach that? Like you said, like I'm sure you were emotional as well, even though you were not part of the original film. Like you said, I feel like you would have to be emotional too, like like capturing that. So I guess, can you talk about that? And like, yeah, I just found that it's so beautiful. That whole sequence is just unbelievable.
Yeah, I think, you know, as a DP, I work with various directors, and Ryan is, he cares about humanity. He's a lovely human being, and he cares about everybody on set, his actors, and we're making a film, but we're actually, telling a story, and we're making history. He still considers the families outside of the people on set that make the film, because it's long hours and all this stuff. So when you work for someone like that, your relationship with them is very felt. And so I feel like in those earlier sequences that you see in the film, and the funeral, and the procession, it's all very, it's accurate to how they felt about Chadwick, and also the storytelling of just the people that came before us. Most of our HODs on set were people of color. So not only are we talking about our ancestors' history, but we're presenting some of our ethnicities in such a bright and vibrant way, and powerful and confident. So all of those things are very important to Ryan and the filmmakers and Hannah and Ruth. And so, I think emotionally the strength shines within those scenes because of who we are culturally, but also just because of how Ryan is, as a person, and how affected he was by the loss of Chadwick, but their relationship, and how all of the other players that came before me that made the first one felt about Chadwick. So yeah, I think that's why the audience gets really quiet, right? Because you have a bunch of filmmakers that it's very important to them to kind of convey again, the culture, but also like how powerful this man was to them as a person, but also, his character out in the world. So yeah, I think while we shot those scenes, it was, we were celebrating, and we all felt like we were kind of a part of that sequence. You were there photographing it with the operators, but you also felt like you were in it. And it was very emotional. So yeah, I think that's why it resonates so much, because of just who he is as a filmmaker and how we approached it.
Yeah, I mean, I love all of his films, and like I feel like one of the things that I find so incredible about this is, like you're saying, like it's a massive movie, like it goes into so many different locations, and it's all these huge action set pieces, like you mentioned, and all these different things, and yet it does have such a great personal touch. And I feel like, I guess that it doesn't surprise me coming, because like I feel like a lot of the Marvel's movies and shows do have those kind of personal touches. This one feels obviously more so. I mentioned you work with Loki. I mean, like as well, like how did, like I guess how did your perception of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and stuff change, getting to do it, with regard to like being able to be such like impart so much personal filmmaker ideals into these projects? I guess, was that a surprise for you?
Yeah, I think I'm always approaching everything from the heart, as cliche as that sounds, because I want my audiences to be affected. I mean, I got into this business because I, as a small child, sat in a theater and I watched something and I was like, oh my God, it was felt right. It was very, it's on the screen, it's big, it's powerful. You have so many questions afterwards, and you keep thinking about it, later. So I think, you know, your personal touch and what you bring to the table, like, your history as a filmmaker, and just, emotionally how you connect to your actors and your team, is so important. So even this big machine and doing Loki, and then, it was great. I had that experience prior, and then I came into this, you just want to be able to touch your audiences. And I think, the skill and management is what you find more on the bigger movies, right? Because there's so much prep that you have to do and so much technical stuff that you have to figure out, and your teams are huge. But at the end of the day, those are all tools. You want your audiences to feel the story and to emote. So, I think working with the right people where that's important makes your work shine. And I was lucky enough on both of these projects to work with people like that, and be supported by Marvel, to push the envelope and to kind of be very creative. So I had two great experiences, but I think everything that I've done prior, small, medium, music videos, commercial work, like it's all the same. It's, you really just want to do your best work, but you're putting yourself out there so that people respond, because everyone's vision is different, right? If
Right.
someone else shot it, it would be very different.
Right.
So I think because of the people that I had, we were all very, like, had similar taste, and we're all on the same page, which helps a lot.
Yeah, for sure. What was for you? Do you remember like what it was that you were watching that you were like, oh man, I want to do this? Like what was it
Yeah,
for
I
you?
do. Yeah, yeah. I mean, my mom used to take me to see films growing up. I loved Woody Allen films. The characters in those films were so vibrant. You didn't feel like you were watching a movie. Manhattan was very affecting when I saw that. And Raging Bull also very affecting. Funny because those are both black and white.
Black and white. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I just also Broadway Danny Rose is a favorite of mine, a Woody Allen film. Yeah, I think starting with those, I saw those in film school and we had to write paper on them. And that's when I learned like how to dissect it, right? Like that all of these little choices that make you feel something are like thought out by the filmmakers, right? It's not just happenstance, right? And that interests me to kind of learn how to do that. So then I started researching the job.
Yeah, that's awesome. You mentioned there before in your previous answer about like working with the actors too, and I mean, this film, you have all these incredible actors. It's just like again, like an embarrassment of riches, and they're all these amazing performances. I feel like from Letitia and Lupita and Angela Bassett and all every one of these incredible women who are just crushing these scenes. Can you talk about like I guess how your role in working with the actors in those scenes? I mean, like thinking like I mean, Lupita. I mean, excuse me, Letitia has so many of these emotional scenes. Like even at the end with Lupita, at like with the young T'Challa reveal in that scene, I was just like blown away by the performances and the way you capture them is just beautiful. Can you talk about like the specifics of working like with those performances and those performers and like how you kind of approach that?
Yeah, Ryan's always very close to his actors. Like he's on set right by the actors. And on these bigger projects, I operate when I can, but I have, with more than one camera and multiple cameras at times. And I have an operator. But I'm used to operating, and that's kind of how I like to frame, light the set, and get close with my actors. So I'm very specific on how I like things, and even if I'm not, operating myself. So I think I've always had that kind of emotional connection to female leads. I've done a lot of smaller films where um, we've mostly had female protagonists. So in this film, having so many strong women with big, vibrant personalities on and off set was really amazing. And you get to know them, and you get to know their face and their angles, as far as lighting and just the beauty of their personality. So I think because they're so special, and they really are special people in their daily life, but also performers, that you see that how they're framed, right? I feel like we found the framing for a lot of these women in the film, different lenses that we appreciated. Ryan and I had a favorite lens, the 35, that we appreciated a lot. That was kind of our emotional lens that captured a lot of our very strong performances. For instance, Tribal Council, when Ramonda gives her speech and Okoye gets fired. There's a beautiful close-up of Okoye where a tear falls down her face, and that's like one of my favorite shots. But yeah, I think as a woman, I like to take care of my actresses. And yeah, I mean, not to say not with male actors as well, but there's a connection that I have, obviously, when they're females. Being a woman myself and being a mother. So yeah, it was lovely to kind of talk to Ryan about that early on and make sure that these women were portrayed beautifully, emotionally, dreamy, strong. And I think that's the way that they're photographed, and that sings, I think, throughout the film, because you don't rarely see this many women of color in this kind of in these very powerful positions. And also their performances are so diverse. At one moment, Okoye is fighting in an action scene, and then she's making you laugh. And then she has a very emotional scene. And it's beautifully written. Like Ryan and Joe did such a great job of like making the female characters full, not just like one note. And that's really great to watch, like to be there to shoot that, but only to also as an audience member to like tell my family about it, because they also enjoyed seeing that, because it's very rare to see that on the big screen.
Yeah, for sure. And like we said, like this is like one of the biggest movies in the world. Like you're going, like it's just the scale, the reach of these movies is just unbelievable. So to have that and to be able to put that out there into the world, I think is like really special
Yeah.
too. You more like, I mean, we're talking about like all like the performances. Obviously, I mentioned like it's a great action movie too. There, the Ryan obviously does a lot of it feels like oneers or whatever, right, in his movies where it's like kind of notable. I think in this one it's the Riri in her lab, right? Like that is a
Yeah.
one shot, and that seems awesome. And again, it was one of those where you're watching, you're like, oh, this is not, they're not, this is just one take, right? Like you kind of like slowly realize as it's happening, and it's so cool. And I guess, can you talk about like the choreography that goes into that and the planning that goes into that? Obviously, that is a very complicated sequence, and it leads into like this massive action chase scene, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, can you talk about that? I thought that was such a great shot. It's so cool.
Yeah, no, there's a couple like that. The movie starts off with like a longer one take as well, and that was Ryan's idea. We're in the lab, when Shuri goes through the lab, and then as you mentioned, the Boston Riri's garage. Yeah, he had that idea on the day on set. It wasn't something that we planned a ton prior, because we were discussing like how we wanted to cover that sequence. In general, just our angles in the garage, because that set was so fun and had a lot of texture. And obviously the tension builds as it transitions into the chase. And so he had the idea, and we just explored it. And what's so great is, you have to, because the camera is moving between the actresses, and you have to hit those beats on dialogue. Ryan's working very closely with our A camera operator, Jason Elson, who's brilliant. And he, it's a very dark set. That set was very dark. The lights go out. So it was very technical, and it had to be executed very well. And we approached it like that after Ryan got the idea, and we just kind of hit those beats. And then obviously there has to be like a cut hidden in there at some point, because we have the lighting gag, and there's some stunts. But I think after I watched it pieced together, I really enjoyed it, because it did feel like that on the day. You have these actresses playing off each other, and they're all very funny and confident. And Riri, I think her little sequence, where she gets pissed off, is really cool, and it just flips back and forth, kind of like an old 70s film. And I really liked that sequence. But no, there was a lot of coordination on the day, but I think it was executed well. And that's what happens. Sometimes you don't exactly know in prep if you want to do that, but then when you're in the space and you see the rehearsal and you think about it, and that's where Ryan's great. He's always very open to ideas and making things better and more energized and exciting. And so that was one of those things that I think he came up with that worked. Because sometimes, those shots don't always work. You don't want to bump the audience in a way that you're forcing a shot that's going to interrupt kind of the flow or the emotional quality. And I think that was the perfect choice, instead of just regular coverage and cutting.
Yeah, for sure. And we have to wrap up here, but I want to ask you, you mentioned lighting there. I mean, like, that's one of the things I was like kind of like really impressed with the movie. One of the many things I was really impressed with about this movie is that, I mean, I'm always like, underwater stuff is so complicated and difficult. I feel like, and a lot of times I've seen stuff where it just doesn't really work, right? And like here, I think it does work, and I feel like it's an alchemy of all the stuff all the departments are doing and everything. But from your perspective, like, I guess, how did you like think about like doing those scenes and like making sure they were properly captured and stuff? I don't know. I just found it like, it just is really well done. I think a lot of the scenes under sea, I guess, as it were.
Yeah. It was, I think from the start, we all have a context for what underwater looks like if we've been swimming, excuse me, or if you do scuba diving, or if you swim in the ocean in Mexico or Hawaii, like, people kind of know what light looks like and what things look like under there. So when you see a film where people are pretending to be underwater and it doesn't look like what we're used to, automatically it's fake, right? It's too sharp, it's too bright, things aren't moving normal, people are talking underwater, so I think we all know what that looks like when it doesn't look good. So it was our intention early on to make sure when we were doing it, because it was all new, right? Introducing this new character, this amazing huge character for this Marvel film, that it feel grounded and that it look real. And what can we do to make sure that happens? And that's from Ryan. So he's making, that's the directive. So as a team, we all want to do that. And it's very important to Ryan. So everybody is doing their best to make sure that the images look real. So from the start, we made sure we built a 20-foot tank on a stage, and we shot as much as we could underwater. So in our prep time, we put costumes and set pieces, actors in the water, anything that we could. We had our underwater DP, who's also operator, who also worked on, many underwater films, put the camera there. How do we want the camera to move? What feels right? Distance from the actor. How does light fall in the depths of the ocean? So all these things are tested underwater. And when we shot them, also dry for wet. So we shot the same things underwater in a dry environment on a stage and lit them exactly the same. And then we gave those two elements to Weta, who's our VFX vendor, who put those sequences together. So the final composite always has a wet reference. So we're not making it up, and it has the contrast ratio that we want, the texture that we want. And all of these things are very important, but with the intention that, there's darkness underwater, and that, it has texture, marine snow they put in afterwards, and we kind of dirtied up our water when we shot as well. So there's particles, and we all know that that's what happens in the sea. So yeah, I think it was a directive, and people seem to respond to it very nicely. Like they feel that it looks different, and it looks, you know, emotional and moody, and dense and real for you know, a highly VFX film. So yeah, that comes from a place of just always trying to make it look as real as we can, by putting stuff in water.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and it works. We have to wrap up there, but it's been great chatting with you. Autumn Durald Arkapaw, cinematographer for Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Thank you so much. It's great
Yes,
hearing you
thank
talk about the
you.
film. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you.